There we go. I think we should be right now. So firstly, thanks everyone for coming along for our candidate information session here today. As I said, we've got a few people in the room here and online. I might just get the staff in the room to put your hands up so the people in the room know who's actually here as a potential candidate versus who the staff are. So, and we've also got the Mayor of Queanbeyan and Pallarang, who I'll introduce shortly, to come up and speak as well. Before we do get started, though, I'll firstly just acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land, waterways and airspace of the Shire. Here's a bit of an agenda for today, which hopefully you can all see online as well as the people in the room here. As I mentioned, we do have a guest speaker today who's going to share some of their experiences in being a councillor and a mayor. That's Kenrick Winchester, the Mayor of Queanbeyan and Pallarang Regional Council. I'll also introduce our staff here at Council, a little bit about what Council does and how we go about things. And then we've got some information on the election itself and how to go about registering and nominating for the election. And hopefully we've got plenty of time for questions here today too. Before I do get Kenrick up though to start us off, just as I mentioned, we are going to live stream this today so that people can watch afterwards if they like. And for those of you that are attending, if you want to go back and re-look at anything and then follow up with any questions, that'll give you the chance to do that too. If we do need to evacuate, there's two options essentially. There's out the back door up directly right of here. It'll take you out to the car park and we can get out around there, or there's the stairs directly down the front. The bathrooms, if you're not aware, for those in the room, are just up to the right outside this door, and if you head down the corridor, they're on the left, just past the stairs. And we'll have time for questions at the end of this session. There is quite a bit of information here, but what we will do is when Kenrick finishes his session, we'll have a bit of time for question and answers there, so you can hassle him about all of his knowledge while he's in the room, because he does have to take off at 11:30 if we're not done. And as I mentioned, we've got staff in the room here. We've got our 3 senior staff who'll be happy to answer any questions either as we go through, if they're things for their functional areas, or at the end for those in the room if you want to have a chat to them too. So I'll introduce myself, which I just realised I didn't do at the start. My name's Anthony McMahon and I'm the CEO here at Council, and I've been in that role for almost 3 years now, if I include the period of time I was acting, and before that was the Director of Assets and Operations here. My role is essentially to be the link between the elected body, so the councillors, and the staff of the organisation. And I guess the overall way to describe it is to make sure that the organisation or the staff are moving forward with the direction that the council sets for us, and sort of act as that conduit in between the two. And I will introduce our executive staff after and what they do. But before we do that, I might ask Kenrick to come up, and I did fire him a few questions late last week to run through that I thought might be good prompts and the sort of stuff you want to hear. But as we mentioned, there'll be time for questions if you want to hit him up with those at the end too. So over to you, Kenrick, and hopefully you can remember to keep yourself square in the camera, which I'm never good at.
We're right there?
Yep.
All good. All right. Very good. Right, I'd also like to start by acknowledging country as well and pay respects to any First Nations people attending today. So, yeah, I'm Kenrick, Mayor of Queanbeyan and Pallarang Regional Council. I've been the mayor for this current term, so about 2.5 years, but was on council from 2012. So I've actually been around for a little bit. Yeah, when AJ approached me at the recent meeting we had of the Canberra Region Joint Organisation, he said he'd like to have a guest speaker here from one of our young mayors in the region. And Matt Harch and Chris Hanna both said no, so you ended up with me up in Queanbeyan. And I don't profess to know a hell of a lot about Bega Valley, to be honest with you. I have a lot more experience with Eurobadella, my wife's family. I had a house there, so I spent a lot more time in and around Bateman's Bay rather than Bega, but I managed to bring the really cold weather with me down the hill when we came down yesterday. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, I guess, and why I put my hand up back when I was 28 and made the decision to run for council, back for Queanbeyan City Council back then. I've always had a very strong family history in the region, in and around the Monero and Yass, Jasper and Braidwood. And yeah, I'd always put my hand up to go on committees and different things. I was school captain at primary and high school, and I always felt that I was a bit of a leader, I guess. And yeah, when I started playing sport, always ended up being on the committee of the football clubs that we played for. When we had my first son, I just noticed in the local newspaper that the local council election was coming up, and it was always something I've been half interested in. So I decided to put my hat in the ring. I got the 11th spot out of 11. There was actually more donkey votes than what I actually received, but I did get the last spot, and it's basically just gone from there. Some of the most rewarding things that I've found as being a councillor is the fact that you do get to have a large say in what the council does and its direction and what its priorities are. Definitely more so since I've become mayor. I've seen, become a lot, just being able to see when it comes down to budget time, putting the priorities together and actually saying, that park or that sports ground or that road or that cemetery that's been neglected for a while now, actually getting to put funds towards it and getting a few things sorted out. In my time on council, we did go through a merger back in 2016, I think it was. Queanbeyan City Council was merged with Palorang Council. Palorang was based around Bungendore and Braidwood and towns like Captain's Flat. It was sort of a council that didn't have a town centre, and Queanbeyan was a town centre council that didn't have a shire, or much more like a Sydney council, low, small area, but high population. Basically 0 dirt roads, 2 bridges, merged with a rural area that had 800 k's of unsealed roads, lots of bridges, low rate base, aging infrastructure. Braidwood, the only heritage listed town in the state, which brings a lot of issues when it comes to anyone wanting to do anything in the town of Braidwood. So yeah, it's been a huge learning curve for us as a council over the last 5 or 6 years as a merger. And as soon as I took over as mayor 2.5 years ago, unfortunately, we had to go through a special rate variation process. I know your council has gone through something similar, and it was full on. It's definitely the most stressful thing I've ever had to do in my life, go out and explain to people why we need to raise rates. Ours was 18% per year for 3 years, which is about 63%. So going to rooms like this, with meeting with people who are very unhappy with the direction the council was taking, but trying to explain the fact that we don't do this, the council will run out of money. We will have an administrator appointed most likely, and one person will make all the decisions, including the decision to proceed with the SRV. So thankfully, that's in the past now. We did get ours approved, and we've just implemented the 2nd year of that. In terms of other challenges that our council has gone through, I've talked about the merger. We just opened a brand new building, not too dissimilar to this one, a little bit bigger, probably a little bit more expensive. And the fact that it was opening at the same time we're asking people to pay significantly more rates was very bad timing. And people don't understand it was the former council that made that call. Even though I was part of that and I did agree with it, the current council always gets the blame. So our council did have a huge change after the last election. We have 11 councillors at Queanbeyan. 9 of them were brand new. So it was only me and one other councillor who had any council experience. So it's been a huge learning curve for them. And we had a new general manager at the time as well. Rebecca Ryan's our general manager. She'd only been in the role, or she hadn't been in the role. We literally, the meeting after I was elected mayor, straight after, Peter Teggett, who some of you will know, used to work at this council. We went into the mayor's office and he told me straight away, the very first thing after I was elected, just so you know, in 6 weeks I'm leaving the council. So that was fun and interesting for a brand new mayor. The challenges in terms of personally, the hardest thing I found as a councillor and especially as mayor has been social media. So unfortunately, the days of people just writing letters to the editor once a week, and that's what you had to worry about back in the good old days. Anyone can get onto social media and say basically whatever they want in all sorts of different community forums. And for me personally, having not just me, but people from my family and that, seeing comments and different things from people who sometimes don't have all the information or don't know what they're talking about in particular, that's probably the biggest challenge I've had. Stepping up from councillor to mayor, the biggest difference is the time required in the role. But unfortunately, we still don't get paid enough for it to be a full-time position. But so yeah, I still work full-time and do the mayor job on top of that. So I'm exceptionally time poor. I'm very lucky that I have a wife who works in a position where she can. She's a teacher and she works 3 days a week. But if I didn't have my parents and my other siblings and other and good neighbours to rely on to help us, there's no way you could do the job properly. Lots of events that you get invited to as mayor that the councillors sometimes might not, but with that invite comes an expectation that you actually do come and turn up, and that's difficult. Where in rural setting here, you might have an invite to be somewhere, down at Eden, but also, an hour later you're required at the opposite end of the council area, and it does become very difficult. Lots more emails, I find. Lots of people like to go direct to the mayor on lots of issues, and sometimes I'll copy in all councillors, but I find a lot of stuff comes direct to me, expecting me to reply personally when I'm heavily reliant on staff or whatever the actual issue is. And phone calls as well. Us advertising my mobile phone straight after the election, we had to take it down basically, because you'll find that a lot of issues that have already been prosecuted under the current council, some people want to re-prosecute it. Under the next one, approach the new councillors and try their best again to get whatever issue they have burning, get it back on the agenda and try and get a different result than what they had last time. I've come across a lot of good, but also I'll call bad councillors in my time, in my 3 terms on council. We ended up with a couple who basically stopped coming to all workshops, would probably come down to 1 every 3 formal meetings. So my advice is to the candidates, don't do that. There's going to be times where, there's going to be good times, there's going to be challenges. You are going to have disagreements with your fellow councillors. It's impossible to agree on every single thing that comes to council. I think that it's really important that you're able to have a good debate, a good argument, if you like, in the chamber or outside the chamber or whatever, but move forward and work together, because when you don't, that's when you end up with a toxic council. And unfortunately, I would say the first 2 councils I was involved in, that's what ended up happening. You have councillors who don't talk to each other. It makes it awkward for everyone, and it's just not a good environment to be in, not just for the councillors, but also for the staff. One of the things that I'm glad that I did was undertake a lot of training, LGNSW training. Anything that the council puts forward, I would recommend you do that. Not just the training, but the people you meet, your fellow councillors from across the state. Some of the people I've met from the training that I've done have gone on to become state and federal MPs, or just become really good people to talk to when an issue does come up, or have a chat with them at conference as well. If you can get yourself elected as a delegate and head along to conference, I think it's really worthwhile getting to know other councillors, other GMs, other staff from other councils, and learn about their issues and what they're doing, because you do tend to sort of focus on your own council and your own problems. And sometimes it's refreshing to know other councils are having similar problems or worse sometimes, and you think you have a tricky councillor in your council, and then you meet someone from Broken Hill or somewhere else, and oh, well, I'll put up, our council's actually not that bad. Like I said, just trying to work together. I know it's hard. You probably will end up with people from across the political spectrum. Happens at all councils. We have a Greens councillor, we have a member of a National Party, obviously Labor and Liberal councillors, and there's things that come to council where they will have a good argument, but the majority are still able to work together most of the time, agree on the core priorities of the council. So hopefully the next council here at Bega Valley will be able to do that. I know you're going back to having a popularly elected mayor, so good luck to everyone who's putting their hand up with that. We don't have that in our council area anymore since the merger. And yeah, last thing I'll say before I'll take questions, I guess, is just one thing that I've learnt to do more and better since I've become mayor is working with the staff in a more productive way, I guess. You do have a good GM here. AJ, I've met him a few times. He's very well respected in the local area at the JO. He plays a leading role there. And yeah, all these 2ICs, I'm sure, are good people as well. And, you know, they're all here doing their best. Unfortunately, staff sometimes end up getting thrown under the bus a little bit by members of the public who don't know the full situation, or, you know, they can just be unfairly targeted, the same that councillors can, and just try and remember that, I guess, and do your best. But that's sort of where I'm up to. I've got my own council campaign underway. Obviously, we haven't had our info session like this as yet. So I should be around post the election, maybe not as mayor, but I'll definitely be on the council unless something's gone horribly wrong between now and then. I'm happy for anyone to reach out to me direct to chat about things. But yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you for having me, and yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. And hopefully I haven't said anything too controversial.
Thanks, Cameron. If you're up there, might just open it up to questions either online or in the room. Any questions?
Just yeah.
Thanks for pointing out some of the challenges.
Yeah.
Of being a councillor and mayor. Can you give us the upside?
The upside. No, it is good. You get to meet the best people in the council area. All the people from all the different organisations. You know, your Rotaries and Lions clubs, but your footy clubs and sporting clubs and charities. You get to meet everyone that's doing all the best kind of work. Unfortunately, you do get to meet some people you'd probably wish that you hadn't met, but that's part and parcel of the role. But someone like me who loves you know, I'm a very social person, loves going to sporting events. There's always something to go and do and meet and see. And yeah, but and the fact that you are in that role, you do get to make the decision. You know, if someone's been lobbying you, or you know that there's a problem with weeds or roads or anything, that you know, you are in a position where you can actually make something happen and get something fixed. One of the election commitments I made last year last time around was about the state of our roads, and that'll be a big thing for any council. Is that roads is always going to be one of the big priorities of things you hear from members of the community about. So we're increasing our we're putting on basically an additional grader crew, so increasing our capability by a third from next year, and that's something that's, you know, that we've done as a council. We've opened new sporting infrastructure that should have been done many years ago when I was a boy, finally getting done because we put it on there as a priority, and we're able to get you know, funding from state and federal. It's important to have a good relationship with your state and federal members. I know it's not always possible. I had a very frosty relationship, I think you would say, with our former state member. The current state member, I could ring him right now and he'd answer. We share Christy as our federal member, have a good relationship with her. I think we're lucky to have her, and you're lucky to have her as someone who lives and breathes this part of the world. Yes. Any other questions before I sit down?
I've got something that would be interesting. You mentioned earlier about having the merger, so going from kind of the city council to including regional. Have you found any ways of community engagement that's worked, that you've been able to sort of interact with those various communities and be able to balance their needs?
Yeah, so we do get out there a lot. I'll say that even though Pallarang in terms of population is much smaller than Queanbeyan, it would take up at least half, if not more, of our time in terms of important decisions that come to council. Getting out to Braidwood and Bungendore, Captain's Flat, and even smaller communities like Nerriga and Araloon and other places is important. But yeah, it's hard. Some people will always think that they were better off under the former council. When they talk about demergers, people out of Braidwood don't want to go back to Pallarang. They want to go back to Tallaganda and Yarralumla, you know, tiny councils of 2,000 and 3,000 people. I think there's a push in Bombala for the same thing. I think it's just not realistic and would be a bad outcome to go back that far. But it is hard. Braidwood used to have its own council. Now it can't. It's very difficult for them to have anyone elected onto our council. There's 26,000 voters in Queanbeyan City and only 6 in Pallarang. And basically the results in Queanbeyan, the 11 councillors based on results in Queanbeyan are the 11 councillors we have on our council. One thing we did get was a much better mix of males and females. I know this room seems to be dominated at the moment by male candidates, but the Queanbeyan City Council Well, the first Queanbeyan Palarine Council had more councillors called Peter than they did females. Nine blokes and 2 female councillors. This council we had 6 female councillors and 5 males. So it was a big change, and for the better. So, all right, there's no more questions. I'll sit down and let you get back on to with the information session. Thank you for having me.
So if you do have questions online, I've got Jackie there too. She's keeping an eye on things, so hopefully she'll catch our attention if you do have a question online. The next session that we were going to go through, or the next part of the day, was just to talk a little bit about what council does and then get on to the election process. And we are going to try to, I'll try not to get bogged down in the detail of the bureaucracy and the legislation around being a councillor on the back end. If you do get elected, there's plenty of time for that later. This is just a little bit more of an overview of what we do and how we do it. So Kenrick mentioned before, we do have our 3 directors in the room here today. We've got our Director of Assets and Operations, Anne McFarlane, who is down the front here. We've got Emily Harrison, who's our Director of Community Environment and Planning, over this side as well, and Ileana Bolton, who's our Director of Business and Governance. And I won't run through the detail. Hopefully you can see that on your screen there of what functions each of them look after. But there is quite a bit that council does have responsibility for. And out of that list of services that you can see there, they aren't necessarily consistent across all councils, which you might find interesting. So not all councils do actually do the same things. And I'm sure Kenrick can look at that list and say, there's things on there that they don't do at Queanbeyan, but they've probably got a couple of other things that they do that we don't. And that is one of the biggest challenges in a council, is understanding what it is that you have to do and then what some of the discretional things that are happening are. I won't get bogged down on this, but as you can see, there's sort of 3 layers of government, and I'm going to make the assumption here that everyone's not completely familiar, but 3 levels of government, and clearly local government is the level of government with the most direct interaction with the community, as you can see here. And we've just got some of the differences there between what it is local government provides and the other levels. Again, one of the biggest challenges councils continue to face is that federal and state governments typically keep pushing things down to us with very limited resources to come with it. And the community obviously directly interact with us the most and expect us to be able to change and influence everything at those other levels. Now, the legal framework that sort of governs everything we do here in local government, and this is what I won't get bogged down in, but essentially the Local Government Act and the Local Government Regulation are the 2 key pieces of legislation that direct what it is we do in local government. And there's a whole heap of other pieces of what I might call peripheral legislation that impact everything we do. And this list that we've got up here is certainly not exhaustive. It's just a few examples there of some of the major ones that we spend probably quite a bit of time interacting with. But again, lots of other things that will come up over time. And if you do get elected, you'll start to find every now and then that something new crops up in front of you and there's a new thing to get your head around. In terms of the principles of local government, they're up here in quite a bit of detail, but there was a change that happened back, I think it was between sort of 2012, 2014, something like that, where we were very much changed the way we did our planning and long-term thinking about what it is that our community needs. And you can see up there the reference to the integrated planning and reporting framework that I'll talk about a bit more. But that was a bit of a paradigm shift when that came in local government, because prior to that, we typically had annual management plans and thought fairly short term. And that's been a real change in how we do things now, bringing that in to think about the long term. You'll see a couple of points there that aren't necessarily easy to interpret exactly what they mean. There is a bit of vagueness in that. So that second last dot point is probably a clear one of act fairly ethically and without bias in the interests of the local community. So when you start referring to local community, that can be quite a broad definition to try and wrap your head around. And you'll no doubt find that if you do decide to stand in the lead up to the election, you're going to get lots of different views on what the most important thing in the community is, and lots of sub-communities here in the Bega Valley. And I know Kenrick talked about their post-merger experience with a city essentially and then a regional area. That's a clear way to differentiate your community. here in the Bega Valley, as you know, we've got a few sort of larger population centres, but even within those, there's a lot of diversity in what the people in the community expect of us. So just a little bit more here, and that first dot point goes to what I just said. The other thing to keep in mind is when you are elected as a councillor, you've got this obligation to think about the interests of the people that elected you, the here and the now, but then the long-term interests of the community and what's right for the future of your community too. And those two things don't always go hand in hand. And it's another thing Kenrick alluded to with the special rate variation process. It is a bit of a shock for the people here and now, but it's sort of essentially the best or the right decision to make for the future of your community long term if they're going to continue to get services and infrastructure they need. This is just a little bit of a representation of the interaction between the elected body and the staff of the organisation and sort of who does what. This has always been one of the really vague definitions in all of the legislation, in my opinion, is around what is setting the policy and strategic direction of council versus what is the operations of council. And no doubt if you get elected, it's going to be the hardest thing for you to wrap your head around. I've been in local government for a bit over 16 years now, and that interface between is this a operational issue we're talking about or is this a strategic policy issue always becomes a tension point. So if you do get elected, the role of the council is to employ the CEO, and then it's the role of the CEO to employ the rest of the staff of the organisation and deliver on the objectives of the elected council and the plans of the council. That's always a bit of a tough one to get your head around when you first get elected too, is that you can't actually directly influence the people in the organisation. That's got to be done through the CEO. And it is a bit of the other thing, I guess, on this one, it is a bit of a two-way process where council sets the policy and strategic direction of the organisation, but they quite often do that based on information and recommendations that they rely on the staff providing to them, because obviously there's a lot of things you don't have access to and you need that information to make good decisions. So it is really a two-way process. The other challenge, I guess, in local government, particularly as an elected councillor, is trying to find the balance between everything you're expected to do. And unlike other levels of government in a lot of ways, you are a direct service provider. Some examples there. You are advocating for lots of other things that you don't directly control on behalf of your community. So that's the civil leadership function. You then also have to set a lot of rules, and then you have to regulate against not only those rules that you're setting, but the rules that are set by others. And again, this is one of the biggest challenges for local government is we're always seen as the easy target for making life difficult for the community, but you certainly aren't always the ones in control of the rules. And that's sort of a bit of the link between regulator and advocate role. If your community is sending a message back saying, you're telling us we can't do these things or we can't do the things in the way we want to, do something about it, that's where the advocacy comes in. This is some of you may have seen this. We did get this image developed when we were going through our special rate variation process. It's just a visual representation of the complexity of everything we do at this council in particular. And again, if Kenrick looks at this, he'll see some things they don't necessarily have the direct link with. So yeah, just a representation of all the things we do there, and a bit of an explanation on what the rates go to. So a lot of confusion in the community about what their rates, fees and charges in council actually go towards and where they can be spent. So you see there on the right-hand side, there's a list of some of those functions that come out of the general fund. And then you'll also see separate to that, it's got the three there, water, sewerage and waste are all funded in a different way, and you can't actually cross over where the funds are spent. This is just a little bit about our local government area. I won't go into this too much. The Group 4 bit is probably the relevance. That's a measurement that the New South Wales government used to categorise different councils across the state for comparative purposes. The more you start to look into that sort of comparative data, though, the more you start to realise that it's really hard to compare any two councils in New South Wales. In this local government area, I think this is quite common knowledge now, but we have 9 councillors, which is going to, for the first time, include a popularly elected mayor. So at the last local government election, the community went and had a referendum and decided that they wanted to elect their mayor going forward, which would be for the full 4-year term, whereas in the past, it's been a council elected mayor and the term was a maximum of 2 years for a council elected mayor. They could be re-elected, but they had to have an election every 2 years. So that is a change for us. And if there is questions about that at the end, we can dive in a little bit more to how that actually might play out during the election. So in other words, the fact that in New South Wales, you can stand for both. You can stand for popularly elected mayor and a councillor. There are other states, certainly Queensland, where you can't do both. We also have a number of committees within the Bega Valley Shire Council, and I'm sure Kennery could rattle off a very different list to what we've got here. Again, not all councils do that the same. And the relevance of Section 355, it's actually a reference to the Local Government Act, and that section of the Local Government Act allows councils to delegate certain functions to committees. So that's why we call them Section 355 committees. We also do have a number of other committees of different types and advisory groups as well. This is just a quick snapshot of the employees at council. That staff headcount of 554 is definitely inflated at the moment compared to baseline. And that's predominantly because of the amount of grants that we've had in over the last sort of 5 years or so. We are already starting to notice a bit of a declining trend in grant income, but we're still delivering a lot of grants that we received in the past. And one of the challenges we do have is that a lot of the grants that we do receive don't allow us to fund permanent employees out of that, which means we're in this, what I describe as a vicious cycle of having to continually put people on short-term contracts because we don't necessarily know if we're going to get more grant funding. And then we get another grant and then we say, oh, we're willing to extend your contract, or we say, we can't give you certainty. So that creates a lot of internal issues as well. And you'll see we do have quite a lot of casuals, and a lot of those relate to some of the more fluctuating workforces. So children's services is an example of where we have a lot of challenges with getting staff. So a lot of casuals there. Certainly our swimming pools and lifeguard services rely a lot on casuals as well, as another example. In terms of what you would be responsible for looking after if you're elected, we manage a portfolio of $1.9 billion in assets. Most of those are physical assets. There are some financial assets in that too, but most of it is certainly physical assets. That comes with a lot of challenges, managing an asset portfolio of that size. There's just some examples of the types of assets that we look after. And again, I'm not going to run through these in detail. You can all follow those up if you want afterwards. Like I said, we'll have this online. But quite a diverse range of assets located and scattered across the whole Shire. We do, for example, have 11 sewage treatment plants spread out across the Shire, which is a relatively high number for a population the size of ours. And that comes with its own set of challenges too, in terms of cost of providing all of that infrastructure and assets to a relatively small population. And when I said before, it's hard to compare council areas, Bega Valley is relatively unique in that we've got these urban populations scattered all across the Shire with spine infrastructure between them, essentially roads, and then these little hubs that have all got duplication of everything and not a lot of people funding them. So that's a challenge we've got that is fairly unique. And if you compare it to Queanbeyan and Pallerang, so they've got a really large centre in Queanbeyan, which is a hub. We don't necessarily have one central hub here in the Bega Valley. I alluded to this before in terms of how we're funded. So 3 separate funds that we have here at council. One is the general fund, which I'd say that most of those diverse functions and assets are funded from. Then we also have a water fund and a sewer fund, which are completely cut off from the general fund. They're restricted, so we can't spend funds that we collect for water and sewer on doing anything in the general fund, and sort of vice versa. If we did have more funds in general fund, we could theoretically do that, but there are no councils that do that. Again, not all councils in New South Wales do have water and sewer. particularly in the metropolitan areas. They've got large water authorities that do that. And we do rely very heavily here on grants in the Bega Valley, and that's not uncommon for rural and regional councils. The competitive allocation has been one that's propped us up quite a bit in the last sort of 3 to 5 years, and that's helped us renew a lot of the infrastructure that we've got here in the community. So in some ways, it's almost, in my opinion, created a bit of a false sense in our community of what is actually capable of being delivered by a council, because it's not ratepayer funds. It's been supported by state and federal government. We do also have fees and charges that are another revenue source in addition to rates and what we call rates and charges and grants. They are not commonly an area that fully fund the service that they are providing, and even out of some of those fees, they're set by the state government to do a function on behalf of the state government, but they don't adequately cover the cost of doing that function we're told we have to do. So again, it's the general fund has to prop those up. Kenrick alluded to this earlier. We are part of a number of other associated organisations. One of the key ones is our Canberra Region Joint Organisation. That map there's slightly outdated. East Gippsland aren't actually an associate member of the joint organisation anymore. They were up until a couple of years ago, but withdrew because there was just not enough alignment with what was happening with New South Wales and what our priorities were. And our current Mayor, Russell, is actually the chair of the Canberra Region Joint Organisation, and Kenrick is actually the deputy chair. I'm going to mention this now. When Kenrick said at the start he was the third pick, that's not true. He was the one that I asked to do this today because he's certainly got a lot more experience than our two neighbouring mayors, and had the experience as a councillor before coming a mayor too. The other probably two key organisations that we're part of lots of organisations, but what I describe as the two key ones are the country mayors, and there's 80, what's the number? Someone know it? 80 something councils, 87 rural councils, rural and regional councils are part of that organisation. And that's predominantly about advocating for the shared priorities of rural and regional councils. And then we're also part of Local Government New South Wales, which is an entity representing all of the councils in New South Wales, including those metropolitan ones. I alluded before to the integrated planning and reporting framework, and this is quite a busy slide here, but I'll try and explain it in simple terms. So there's a whole suite of state and some federal plans and strategies that guide the things that we do. We take the information in those plans and strategies and align it with what our communities see as our priorities. So we're currently going through the process now of redrafting a community strategic plan, which is essentially what the community want long term. It's not a council plan, the community strategic plan. Out of that, council then develops its own 4-year delivery program, which becomes the, I guess, how is council going to deliver the parts for the community that they're responsible for, that the community has said they would like long term. And then with that translates into an annual operational plan that's done each year too. And the other key thing that we do is actually on the right-hand side of that slide is the resourcing strategy, which includes a 10-year long-term financial plan and 10-year asset management plans, that's really the financial impact of what it is that council's going to do. And happy to take some questions on that at the end when we get to that, if you do have any more questions on that. But that's essentially the key piece that guides all of the planning around what council does. And that's the words essentially that just go with what I described. So you can read that afterwards. There are guidelines that actually, and hopefully when we do make this available, those links work, and I guess we'll make sure they work. But that gives you a bit more of the detail of what's in each component of the integrated planning and reporting framework, so the different layers of plans. Here at Bega, we also utilise these strategic guiding principles, which align with what the New South Wales Local Government Act says council is responsible for doing. So there's alignment between these strategic guiding principles and the legislation, and this is our articulation in a more detailed level of what that means for us. So In developing policies now, council utilises these strategic guiding principles and trying to ensure that the policy direction council set aligns with these principles. We do have lots of plans and strategies here at Bega Valley, and this is just some examples of it, of them coming up here. Some of them are council-driven plans and strategies. Some of them are driven by legislation, so we don't have a say. We actually have to develop them. And occasionally there are community-driven plans and strategies that we'll develop too. So not all of these are things that all councils do across New South Wales, and we are relatively advanced in the plans and strategies that we've got here at Bega Valley, particularly compared to some of the other councils in our region. And we do sort of, that's one thing I probably should mention is, and Kenrick alluded to this, the councils in our region support each other quite a bit. So someone else has done some really great work, we'll lean on that, draw from their experience and apply it down here in the Bega Valley, and vice versa. So not all of this is stuff that we've just developed ourselves. These are some of the key considerations. It's probably a nice way of framing what we would typically call issues. We do have an ageing population here in the Bega Valley that throws up a whole series of challenges. A couple of examples being that the demands and the needs of our community are changing, particularly with the services they would like and the infrastructure they would like. It also increases the number of pensioners in our community, which has a negative financial impact on council. So pensioners do get a rate rebate and council contributes part of that. So it essentially means that we aren't getting as much income as a council with a non-pensioner population or a lower pensioner population. No doubt everyone here is aware we've been getting lots of natural disasters, and even though we do get quite a bit of funding to support the recovery from those disasters, they tend to throw all your plans into chaos, and everything you thought you're going to do for a period of time goes out the window to deal with those disasters. We are quite fortunate again here that, depends how you think about it, I'll say we're quite fortunate here that we've got a lot of experience in dealing with natural disasters now, so our systems and processes are pretty advanced, and we don't tend to have the same challenges at the moment that some other councils do in responding to disasters. But the further away we get from the last disaster we had, the less resources we've still got available within the organisation to respond. So that's a challenge. I alluded to this one before, the large asset base relative to the rate base. So lots of things we look after, but not lots of people to look after them. We are struggling with some of our resources, particularly in planning and engineering, but we're working through how to deal with those, including putting on cadets and training them up. There's a lot of change in the digital space, which is great in terms of improving how we provide services to the community, but it's coming with its own set of risks we've got to deal with. And then the other one is just the ongoing financial sustainability, and that isn't unique to us in the Bega Valley. So as I think everyone's probably aware, we did get a special rate variation approved last year that was spread over 2 years. The amount that special rate variation is going to generate is essentially less than half of what we needed at the time we went for it, but council recognised that there's not an endless capacity to pay in this community, so essentially went halfway to where they needed to. The challenge is that we're already going backwards because some of the costs have increased quite a bit more than the previous models assumed, because we took on the advice of IPART, who assessed the special rate variations, and they gave us figures that were less. So we're in a fairly unique situation in the Bega Valley because IPART have now changed their rules around how they deal with councils like us that got a multi-year special rate variation approved based on assumptions that were inaccurate that they told us. That's a convoluted way of saying not everything is financially rosy going forward. So that's the end of this part. Before we get on to the actual election process, have we got any? I'm happy to pause here and see if we've got any questions on anything out of that section. We're looking sideways because that's where I can see the screen. Yep, Nigel.
In relation to financial
Yep.
sustainability, my understanding based on the current budget predictions and funding is that even with the 2 SRVs over the next 2 years,
Yep.
in this next term of council, in year 3 and 4, are we looking at deficits? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And if so, what actions are you looking at to try and avoid that situation?
Yeah, so you're correct in assuming that in the forward financial projections, we start running into deficits fairly soon based on everything going forward the way it is. There's only really 2 ways to deal with that. One is to do less of something or increase your revenue. The increasing revenue, essentially, to get to the scale of what you need, needs to come from rate increases. The other part is the other option is what I describe as the harder one. So deciding what it is that you're not going to do. So when council adopted the last long-term financial plan that included the special rate variation of 43% spread over 2 years, so the 24 and 19.6, it already made the assumption in it that we were only going to be able to fund half as much in road and bridge asset renewals going forward compared to what we needed to. So the reason that is typically what a lot of councils do is because there's no pain right here and now politically for doing something like that. It kicks an issue down the track. This elected council, when they put that application IPART, said we recognise we need to review the service mix that we are providing because not rebuilding roads and bridges isn't an option in the long term. We just need time to work with the community on what that is. So if you do get elected, there are going to be some very difficult conversations in the first 1 to 2 years with the community around what do you want to cut back or how much additionally you're willing to pay to keep certain things. When we did do that modelling first time around, this is probably a bit of a scary concept. Even if you halve the number of all of the things that we looked after and provided in the general fund that aren't a road and a bridge, you essentially only saved half as much as you needed per year to get back to a break-even position. And that's just because that road and bridge network in the Bega Valley is so big and the cost of looking after it is so much compared to the population we've got. And it's a bit like Kenrick's experience in Queanbeyan and Pallaring. Queanbeyan Council didn't have that really big, expensive network of assets to look after, and you could almost say Queanbeyan sort of picked up the burden of the regional area around it. And it's the same for most rural and regional councils. It's just the reality of the assets we're meant to look after. Yeah.
Yeah, I think assets, you talk about bridges, you go over on the bridge there when I was 6, you're saying,
Yeah.
that it all goes on what you can allocate.
Yep.
And
Yeah. So the other, and there's a big piece in the so this is, if you didn't hear it online, around bridges specifically as an example. The other key part the key thing that councils do is collect information and then advocate using that data to other levels of government to say, hey, communities like ours just don't have capacity to deal with this stuff, so get your programs right. Under the last state government, there was quite a bit of success in getting what was called a Fixing Local Roads and Fixing Country Bridges program in place, and we got quite a lot of the bridges, say quite a lot. We've got a reasonable number of bridges replaced here in the Bega Valley out of that program, but we've got well over 200 bridges here. Kenrick said before, Queanbeyan had 2 before the merger. You get to some of the other councils, they just don't have the same scale of problem that we do.
no, and it also comes back to council.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't realise that.
Yeah.
You have a duty of care against those assets.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That duty of care thing, that's when people start talking about financial sustainability and you probe them and say, what does that mean? And they start saying, well, it's the ability to fund the things that you need to do for the community. And then you start saying, well, what do you need to do for the community? That's where it starts to get vague again. So a lot of our community will say, you can't shut a library. And they'll also say, but you can't close any bridges, but you can't close any pools, but you can't not do all this stuff. And that's the challenge. That's the hardest part. Being a councillor is all these competing priorities that no one wants to give on. Yeah. Anything online? No, anything else in the room before we move to the next section? If not, we'll move to the next section, which is the last bit of what we wanted to work through today. And again, I'm not sure how much research anyone's done to date on all of this, so apologies if you've researched this to death yourself and this is all not news, but we thought it was better to have this information here than not. So we are having the election on the 14th of September, which is run by the New South Wales Electoral Commission. So council doesn't actually run it. We do provide support to the Electoral Commission, but we're not responsible for holding the election. There are some quite stringent rules around the election process if you do end up deciding to stand, and we've got some key dates here. So just to be really clear, there's probably two key things that you do need to do. One of them is to nominate to stand for election, and the other one is to register. And the time frame for the two to be able to be done is very different as well. So the nomination process happens a little bit later in the piece, and that's where you do need two other electors, two other voters within the Shire to support your nomination. But to register to start campaigning, that's a bit different there. So the nominations, we've got that information there. Oh, sorry, no, they're not the dates to do it. They're dates for information sessions that the New South Wales Electoral Commission are holding. So we'll be sort of skimming, we're just skimming the top here, but you can get more detail through the New South Wales Electoral Commission. And if you do have any questions as you go through the election or nomination process, very much suggest that you get in contact with the Electoral Commission, and I'm sure you'll find them very helpful. So again, mentioned this before, for the first time, we do have a mayoral election happening in the Bega Valley. I suspect, I'm not 100% sure, and in the lead up to the election, I'll be doing a bit in the media on this too, but I suspect it will probably confuse our community a little bit. The fact that this time they go to vote at a council election, there's going to be two papers, not one, like they're used to. And again, getting people to understand that if someone is nominated for the mayoral election as well as a council election, then they can vote for them in both. They're not mutually exclusive. So making sure that people understand that will be important. As I said, in Queensland, the candidate has to make the choice himself. They can't actually stand for both. And anecdotally, from people I know up in Queensland, that tends to favour the incumbent because it's risky for anyone to challenge someone that's in the position if they're already a councillor and they want to be a councillor. They run the risk then of not getting elected at all if they stand for mayor. That information there, I think, is fairly straightforward on how to go about or what you need to do to be eligible to stand for mayor.
So just on those two papers.
Yep.
If you've got the mayoral vote.
Yep.
You don't then have to mark them on the other one.
No, you do. That's the point. Yep.
You do.
So the question was, if someone's on the mayoral paper and you vote for them there, you then don't have to on the other. It's actually the opposite. If you want them to be on the council no matter what, then you should put them on both papers. Yep, you got to vote on both. Yeah.
I think that's where it must.
Confused. Yep. That's what I think there's a chance of that too. So we'll probably do our best in the lead up to the election to keep making that as clear as we can, that you need to vote on both bits of paper. And if someone's name is on both and you really want them on council, then mark them on both papers, basically. The other thing too, don't know if this is, I'm sorry, I'm going to skip ahead. No, it's not there. And I'm going to talk about this now, so that if you are talking to people about how this works, you can explain it to them. The other thing too with the mayoral election is that it's optional preferential voting, which essentially means, say we've got 5 mayoral candidates that all decide they're going to stand. If people only put a 1 against the person they want, but in the first count, there isn't a majority, so no one gets over 50% of the first preferences, then what happens is the one with the lowest number of first preferences gets cut out, and then whoever was number 2 on their papers, that gets cut out will then get counted in the next round. So what I would be saying to everyone is, if you want your vote to count in the mayor election, vote at least halfway down that paper. Don't just put a 1 and stop there. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, however far down you want. Hope that makes sense to people. Yep. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it isn't, I guess the main point is that it isn't first over the line in a mayoral election. You've still got to have more than half the available votes. So what happens each count, though, is the number of available votes reduces as tickets get exhausted. So if someone only put a 1, then next count, they're not included in the number you got to get 50% of. Yeah. Councillor election is quite similar in terms of the process. The other thing that I don't think we go into the detail of this. The other thing, and I'm not going to go into the detail of it either, find that information from the Electoral Commission if you're interested, is setting up your own tickets if you want to get multiple people sort of working together. All I'll say is there's a difference between setting up a ticket and then just encouraging people to put their preferences in a certain order. Two very different things. So if you're interested in that, you can do research on that. You will serve a 4-year term. We assume you will serve a 4-year term. The last council that was here before this one, we assumed they were going to serve a 4-year term, but it got a lot longer than that, and these guys have only been, it's only 2 years, 9 months in the end for their term. So typically a 4-year term. So it is going to fall back into that cycle. This is some of the information on the registration process. So this is the difference between registering to stand for election and then nominating. So the registration bit is the bit that then allows you to start going off and doing your campaigning. So you can do that now. And people have started to do that. I'm not sure who in the room may or may have not have done that, but I know some people have started to do that. I haven't checked the list lately. And there are some really important things that you need to do if you are nominating or registering to stand, and you'll find that on the website. The nomination bit, again, which is the different bit, this is the one that's open on the 5th of August, closes on the 14th of August, and this is the one where you need 2 electors to support your nomination. So it's not a big window, so I'd recommend anyone that's thinking about standing gets themselves organised ahead of this so that they don't miss those timeframes. And then this is a little bit more of the information on the electoral material, so getting information out to people. And again, there's a process that you need to go through to register election material, which you'll find on the Electoral Commission's website. Same with disclosures and electoral expenditure. So 2 times you need to make those declarations. First one is on the 12th of August, which is for the period to the end of 30th of June this year. Second one is 11th of February, which is up to December. So if you do get out and start campaigning now, if you're out and about doing that, then you're going to have 2 reporting periods to think about. And then this is just some information on where the polling venues in the Bega Valley are going to be. Fairly typical. I don't think we've had too many changes, have we, Mark, from last time? Yep, so that's fairly typical. And then this is just where you can get more information. We've got by email there. That link will work when we put it up. You should be able to get that on their website anyway. And then this is sort of the post-election process. You've got the information there on roughly when we expect the results to start coming out. So it'll be probably between Tuesday the 1st and Thursday the 3rd of October. At this stage, we are planning a initial meet and greet the start of the following week, and then we'll have the first council meeting on the Wednesday of the week after this. And that's where you get essentially sworn in as a councillor, doing either the oath or affirmation, and that's when you actually officially take office as an elected councillor. And after that first meeting, we'll then have another meeting scheduled fairly quick to get into the actual business of council. So there's a few key dates there that we've got sort of aligns with what I just said. And something Kenrick alluded to earlier, we will have a fairly extensive induction program. So we'll try and get you, particularly the new councillors, up to speed as quickly as we can, on as much as we can. But I just want to assure you that there is no expectation that you're going to know everything within a couple of months. And the councillors in this room that have been on before will probably say to you, it takes a full term to start to get your head around how it all actually fits together. And I said before, I've been in local government a long time and I still come across something new all the time. So don't expect to have to come in and know everything. We'll help you out as much as we can. This is just a bit of an overview of some of the things we'll work through, and we'll try to keep we've decided that this time around we're going to try and keep the legislative governance stuff as simple as possible. From past experiences when we've had external facilitators from a legal background, it gets pretty boring pretty quickly. So we'll try and progressively work through that as we go along. So that's actually the end of the information we had intended to present today. So are there any questions on anything else that we've talked about today? Either online or in the room?
Anthony, seeing you spoke about election materials,
yeah,
it might be worthwhile to talk about the requirements and the set as far as the display of election materials are concerned.
Yes. Do you want to do that, Em? Do you know? Yeah.
On the detail, but
yeah,
there is particular information about where you can display electoral material and what needs approval.
Yeah. Yeah. So Councillor Porter just raised around talking about the rules around display of electoral material. And yeah, I was going to say, now that you've raised that, what we will do is go and look at who's actually registered and start sending letters to the people that register that clarify that, because it is it's not completely straightforward. So it's not as simple as that. No. So Russell just said, as long as you stick to private land, you'll be right. No, that's not. It's not as simple as that. There's partially depends on the size, partially depends on the zoning, partially depends on exactly what it is you want to stick it on to. Yeah, and timeframes. Yep. Yep. So we'll get some correspondence out anyway, as you start to register.
So it would be generally.
So yeah, so Phil's just said it's started generally be along the same as state and federal requirements. They're not the ones that actually have the requirements. It's the local government that has the requirements for federal and state elections. But don't assume what you've seen around the place in state and federal elections is actually compliant with the law, because quite often it hasn't been. That's sort of the point, that we've actually we've had things pop up where they shouldn't and then had to take action. And sometimes people have listened and sometimes they haven't. Yeah.
And
Nigel, yeah.
Roles, responsibilities,
Yep.
commitments, hours, remuneration. There's sort of nothing to touch on what you're actually required to do.
Yeah. So in terms of remuneration, I'll start with that one. There's actually a report going to the next council meeting on setting the remuneration for councillors for the next 12 months. And how that works is there's certain categories which then determine what the upper thresholds that councillors in certain size of councils can receive. So that'll be publicly known soon. I don't even know off the top of my head what the current number is. I don't know if anyone does. And then the mayor gets they essentially get another higher amount on top of the councillor one. We also then have a facilities and expenses policy that outlines things that get reimbursed and additional support for things like phone expenses and bits and pieces like that too. So there is a policy that covers that as well. In terms of the time expectations, this council has typically had workshops on Wednesdays or council meetings on Wednesday. So the councillors would typically assume Wednesdays are council day. The council can set that themselves, actually can set the time that they hold their meetings. So that will be one of the first things that the new council does, is set their meeting schedules, and that'll determine times. This current council initially started having meetings every 3 weeks, which had been a traditional bit of a pattern for a while here. And then we've moved those to every 4 weeks, and operationally haven't really seen too much of a negative impact. If anything, it's actually helped a bit because it's allowed us to get things done that councillors said they want to get done, instead of just preparing for more meetings. I do expect, though, and it's partially going to depend on what the needs of the newly elected council are, but I expect there'll be a more time expectation in the earlier period as we go through induction too. But we've got an idea of what we think that'll look like, but we'll work with the newly elected council once we know who they are and what their needs are. And I know in the past that different councils have changed their meeting times to accommodate the needs of certain councillors as well. So yeah, it varies. It's not set in stone, certainly not set in stone. That's quite a bit of discretion with the council as to the time commitment.
Or nobody
Yeah.
else asking questions. What about a conflict of interest register? Obviously, people coming to it from different backgrounds. You know, I mean, Claire works with Eden Tourism back in on board. I work with Bega Valley Business Forum. Like, what is there? I mean, I'm sure there's a register, but where are the lines in terms of being able to, one, declare it, and two, do people have to stand down from any positions or that they hold?
Yeah, so we do have interest registers, and if you do get elected, you'll need to get all that information together. One of the things that we would do early days in the induction program, and this is part of that governance stuff, is provide some guidance on conflicts of interest and how to manage them, because it gets really complicated in relatively small communities like this to try and find 9 people that don't know anyone or aren't going to talk to someone over the fence. So yeah, the expectation certainly isn't that people resign from other positions they've got if they get elected. The only advice I would give is to if you spread yourself very, very, very widely in lots of ways, particularly financially, so you've got financial interests all over the place, you'd probably then find yourself really challenging. It could be really challenging to manage all your conflicts. But I've worked in local government for quite a while now with councillors, and never come across a councillor that had to spend that much time out of the room because of conflicts that they weren't effective. It's not that common that you have too many things. Yeah. Any queries online?
Yeah,
Simon?
just one quick query. Could you speak a little more about the role of councillors on the various committees in terms of roles and responsibilities and time commitments and how that all works? That would be great.
Yeah, so I think it's the first meeting, Jack, is it first? Yeah, the first meeting of council, one of the things that the new council would do is decide what committees they're going to have, and then who's going to represent the council on what committees. In the past, we've typically had at least one councillor on most of the committees that we've got, sometimes multiple, depending on where the interest lies from councillors. And your actual question, the response is it varies, the time commitment. Most of them, though, wouldn't meet more than once a month at most. And then if you were the chair of a committee, maybe a little bit more work in between for administration. So the 355 committees that, off the top of my head, that we've typically had in place are like a sports committee, we've got a horse committee, we've got a cemeteries committee, we've got an access and inclusion advisory committee, we've got a traffic committee that's not actually a section 355 committee, it's governed in a bit of a different way. The Bega Eden Merriman's Land Council Committee, it is a 355 committee of council. Yeah, we've got a Waste Advisory Committee. Yeah, got an Affordable Housing Advisory Group, which is not a 355 committee. So And then we've also got an audit risk improvement committee, which is a little bit more complicated because technically going forward, we're not meant to have councillors on that, but we typically have here, and that's something the new council will decide. So there's quite a few different committees and different commitments, and just trying to think, we've probably got some councillors now that aren't on any of those committees. I can't think of who, but possibly do have some that don't. What tends to happen, and has always been the case, is the councillors tend to share the load amongst themselves so that it's not someone loaded up with everything. And more often than not, you'll find a reasonable alliance between the interests of the councillors you've got, so the mix of interests and the committees that are there. So people will generally, during a 4-year term, have a crack at something they're interested in. Yeah. Most of those, no, so I shouldn't say that. Some of those meet in the evenings, not most. I was going to say most, but no, it varies. Yep.
Great, thank you.
No worries. Anything else online or in the room? If not, then thank you all. That was a lot quicker than we had scheduled, which is good. What I will offer, though, for those of you that are here and online, is if you do have any follow-up questions after you've had a chance to digest the information, or you think a bit more, then feel free to reach out. We're certainly more than happy to get you the information that we can. And if I was going to give any first-time councillors a piece of advice, it would be, don't get drawn into committing to anything from any community groups until you've done your research. So if people come to you and say, will you support this thing? My initial response would be, I'm certainly open-minded to it. I just need to do a bit of research first and I'll come back to you. And then, because most things will have some sort of history to them one way or another. And yeah, in the 4 local government elections I've been involved in now, it's always something that catches new councillors out, is they've been drawn into committing to something and then they get elected and then they find out the history that's been going on for 10 years and suddenly realise, I wish I knew that beforehand. So again, if you hear about a thing, we're happy to try and provide any information we can if it exists, but some of it will be genuine things that that really are a good election issue for you to get behind. I'd say just tread lightly initially. All right, well, thank you all for your attendance online and in the room. And I encourage you all, now that you've made this step, to keep thinking about it. And like I said, if there's anything else you want to know that you think we can help with, let us know. So thanks online.